Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the incense-swirled shadows of ancient Egypt, a land of gold, gods, and some seriously trippy secrets. Imagine drifting down the Nile under a violet dusk, papyrus reeds swaying beside you, while a temple looms ahead, heavy with the scent of frankincense and lotus blossoms. But you're not just sightseeing. No, tonight, you're about to uncover the side of ancient Egypt your schoolbooks definitely left out. Because the ancient Egyptians? They got high. Like, see the gods high. And not just once or twice. Mind-altering substances were baked into their rituals, their medicine, even their makeup kits. You're going to meet priests who inhaled psychoactive smoke to talk to the divine, pharaohs who dosed themselves to command awe, and everyday folks who drank their dreams straight from beer jugs. Some of what they did would make your local pharmacy blush, and your local rave look underdressed. And just a heads up, you probably won't survive this time travel trip without some serious sensory overload. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start with the pyramids, of course. Not the tourist ones with the camera flashes and metal railings, the original ones, still under construction, with limestone dust hanging in the air and oxen trudging past you. The workers are shirtless, covered in a sweaty sheen, and not exactly sober. Some chew on blue lotus petals as they haul stones. Others knock back thick beer, fermented to near psychedelic levels. The lines between pain relief and recreation blur here faster than you can say, rah. Sevens. And what's that smell? Sweet and heady, like flowers steeped in honey. That's kai-fi, an incense made from 16 or more ingredients, including raisins, myrrh, frankincense, cinnamon, and possibly something psychoactive. Burned at dusk in temples and bedrooms alike, kai-fi wasn't just deodorant, it was meant to lull the soul, unlock dreams, and maybe even make the gods more likely to answer. Fragrance was power. Perfumes weren't just for seduction, they were offerings, prayers, and sometimes literal medicine. You find one labelled Susanum, a rare perfume worn by queens and high priests, its base made of narcotic blue lotus oil. People didn't just smell like divinity, they inhaled it into their bloodstream. There's debate among historians whether certain perfumes were designed to intoxicate the wearer and those nearby. An ancient flex, for sure. As you walk through a sun-baked market, the vendors shout about kohl eyeliner. But this isn't just for fashion. The black line around the eyes, it was often laced with galena, a lead-based mineral. Dangerous by modern standards, yes, but to the Egyptians, it was protection against the evil eye, and also maybe a mild neurostimulant. They wore their war paint like armour, drugstore, and spiritual Wi-Fi all in one. You duck into a shaded courtyard where a group of healers, women, mostly, are grinding herbs with stone mortars. One of them drops a pinch of mandrake root into a small cup. That root, shaped eerily like a tiny person, is steeped in legend. Used carefully, it sedates. Used recklessly, it can kill. Egyptian texts hint that mandrake was used in love potions, painkillers, and maybe even oracles' brews. Some scholars say the exact recipes are lost to time, others argue they were deliberately veiled in metaphor to keep the power exclusive. In the Temple of Isis, a priestess performs a cleansing ritual. You think it's all incense and chanting until she lifts a small pot of honeyed paste and places it beneath her tongue. It could be nothing, or it could be silphium, an extinct plant the Egyptians used as both birth control and rumoured aphrodisiac. Its disappearance remains one of ancient history's favourite mysteries. Was it over-harvested? Worshipped to death? Or maybe it never really existed, and the recipes were just code for something else entirely. You start to realise the Egyptians didn't separate science, magic, and medicine. If something healed, it was blessed. If it made you see visions, it was divine. If it killed pain, it came from the gods. And sometimes, what they called healing, we'd call tripping. Take opium, found in jars marked with medical symbols and stored beside honey and barley. Did they know it caused addiction? Probably not. But they knew it softened grief, soothed fevers, and helped people speak with the departed. Some researchers think it played a role in funeral rituals, especially for the elite. An upper-class goodbye, wrapped in linen and lotus dreams. Then there's the curious matter of the Book of the Dead. You've seen the scrolls, bright with symbols, marching souls toward judgment. But buried within are spells that hint at altered states. Lines about seeing beyond the veil and unlocking the gates with flame and vapour. Scholars still argue whether these were metaphors for spiritual clarity or literal instructions for vision quests. Meanwhile, somewhere along the Nile, a mother rubs a strange balm on her baby's chest to soothe a cough. Inside, cannabis, wild thyme, and beeswax. All perfectly normal to her, an ancient vapour rub with psychoactive undertones. You begin to understand. There was no sharp line between medicine and mind-bending substance. To them, relief was relief, however it arrived. And just when you think you've catalogued every plant and potion, you spot a funerary statue holding a small, sealed jar. Inside, resins that test positive for psychoactive compounds that some archaeologists believe were meant to help the soul travel to the afterlife in comfort. Because let's face it, nobody wants to enter eternity stone-cold sober. The further you walk, the more the ancient world unravels into something you never expected. Behind the clean lines of hieroglyphs and statues lies a smoky, swirling history of potions, powders, and petals, each one designed to alter not just the body, but the very way the world looked, felt, even smelled. And you're just getting started. You're standing at the threshold of a temple now. Thick stone columns rise above you, carved with looping glyphs and worn fingerprints. The air is heavy with incense, sweet, sharp, smoky. You step inside. Light filters in from slits above, catching on gold leaf and curling smoke. It's not just for drama. What you're breathing might just get you closer to the gods, literally. This is the Temple of Thoth, god of wisdom, writing, and very suspicious rituals. If anyone in ancient Egypt knew how to open the mind, it was the scribes and priesthood of Thoth. You walk past walls filled with spells and astrological calculations. They didn't just study stars, they timed rituals with lunar precision. And many of those rituals involved burning things, specific things. Priests here weren't tossing on just any wood and hoping for the best. They used mixtures of myrrh, frankincense, and cannabis resin. Yes, hashish, essentially. Heated in censers and braziers until it bloomed into a heady, room-filling fog. Visitors described the temples as dreamlike, trance-inducing. And that wasn't by accident. There's growing evidence that these incense cocktails were calculated to affect brain chemistry. Some Egyptian texts mention divine breath, or sacred smoke, phrases that today's researchers are starting to see as possible euphemisms for narcotic inhalation. Historians still argue whether these experiences were meant purely for ritual, or if they doubled as controlled, ceremonial highs. In the inner sanctum, only a few could enter, the high priests, the oracles, maybe the pharaoh himself. Imagine them in white linen robes, standing before a statue of Thoth, the smoke curling around them, eyes glazed with a distant kind of clarity. What exactly were they seeing? The veil between worlds? Or just the walls breathing? Now, over in one corner of the temple, a young priest kneels. He places a pinch of dried blue lotus flower into a bowl of warm wine and stirs. He drinks slowly, and then waits. This flower, Nymphea caerulea, is everywhere in Egyptian art. Held in hand, offered to gods, even placed between the fingers of mummies. But why? Modern science has tested the plant and found it contains a porphine, a compound with mild psychoactive properties. Nothing earth-shattering, but enough to affect mood, consciousness, and perception. Still, nobody agrees on just how strong the effect was. Some researchers believe the lotus wine produced euphoric calm, a spiritual sedation. Others think you'd need gallons to feel anything, and that maybe it was more symbolic than medicinal. But then you look again at the wall carvings, figures reclining, smiling, eyes half closed, blue petals falling around them. Symbolic? Maybe. But you know what you see? A sacred chill-out lounge. And it didn't stop with drinking. Some priest ground the dried petals into paste, smeared it under the nose, or mixed it with honey and smeared it directly on the tongue. Yeah, subtle as a sleepover prank. You get the feeling this was less about mild relaxation and more about diving headfirst into divine communion. Still, Russ, not all sacred plants were so poetic, though datura, also known as Jimson weed or thorn apple, might have been used in some ceremonies too. This plant is known for vivid hallucinations and erratic behaviour. Side effects include confusion, terror, and seeing things that definitely aren't there. Not a party drug, but in tiny, controlled doses. Maybe it helped initiate visions or provoke spiritual reckoning. Some suspect it was part of the oracular rituals, where priests would speak with gods after days of fasting, chanting, and inhaling things we'd now label with a bright warning sticker. You pause at a basin used for ritual cleansing. Inside it, traces of alkaloid-rich herbs have been found, ones that might have numbed pain or elevated mood. The question is, were they bathing to purify the body, or steeping themselves in low-grade chemical warfare against consciousness? One priest enters a chamber lined with copper mirrors and polished obsidian. He wears a headpiece crowned with ibis feathers, symbol of Thoth. As he chants, incense is stoked around him. The effect: a moving hall of mirrors surrounded by curling smoke and rhythmic sound. It's a full-blown sensory experience, designed to overwhelm. You wonder, was the divine voice really out there, or was it coaxed from within? Now comes the fringe bit, the theory that's both fascinating and just shy of conspiracy. That Egyptian priests developed early forms of entheogenic technology. Not machines, but combinations of light, scent, sound, and chemical triggers meant to hack the brain's perception of time and self. Kind of like a prehistoric virtual reality headset, minus the charging cable. Some modern psychonauts argue this is proof of early psychedelic mastery. Academics? Let's just say they remain skeptical and argue whether these rituals had any measurable psychological effect at all. But even the skeptics can't ignore the architecture. The temples weren't just places. They were constructed like mazes for the soul. Narrow passageways that twisted toward ever smaller, darker chambers. Acoustic pockets that amplified low chanting. Light slits designed to align with the solstice, casting sudden beams that pierced the darkness at exactly the right moment. Spiritual design, yes, but also psychological choreography. It's easy to imagine the smoke, the chanting, the perfume, the geometry, and how it might feel like stepping into the afterlife before you've technically left. You head deeper, into the chamber where dreams were recorded. Papyrus scrolls filled with drawings of flying boats, serpents with wings, stars descending to earth. Are these metaphors? Prophecies? Or the psychedelic visions someone tried desperately to translate into flat images? Nobody's sure, but you're starting to notice a pattern. The deeper into the temple you go, the weirder it gets. More smoke, more symbols, more layers of reality folding in on themselves. You think about the priest you passed earlier, eyes glassy, smile quiet. He's not tripping in the modern sense. He's having a moment with the divine. Or maybe, just maybe, the divine was the trip. You're in the embalming chamber now. It's quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that creeps into your ears and stays there. Torches flicker, shadows dance across painted walls, and everything smells like pine, decay, and something sharp. Resin, probably. Or maybe something a bit more narcotic. A body lies on a stone slab, stiff, grey, halfway to forever. Around it move the embalmers, calm and methodical. They're not wearing gas masks or gloves, just linen wraps and intense expressions, like surgeons crossed with shamans. You watch as one of them crushes a mixture of spices and tree sap into a thick paste. That goes into the nostrils. Another worker unseals a jar, its contents glossy and black, with fumes rising like tiny spirits. Whatever's in there, it makes your eyes water. Mummification wasn't just about drying out the body. It was an intensely spiritual act, one believed to affect the soul's journey to the afterlife. And here's where it gets weird. Some scholars think the embalmers might have intentionally altered their own mental states during the process. Not to party, this wasn't a rave, but to connect. To the dead, to the gods, to some other plane of existence. Some of the substances they used, like myrrh, cassia, and opoponax, release volatile compounds that, in enclosed spaces, can have psychoactive effects. Add cannabis resins, possibly opium traces, and you've got a chamber that might have doubled as a sensory deprivation trip, minus the floating pool. There's one record of an embalmer falling into a trance mid-process. No wounds, no poison, just vacant. 1,000-yard stare, mouth still murmuring something under his breath. Historians still argue whether this was a meditative technique, an accidental overdose, or some now-lost ceremonial method of crossing over temporarily to guide the spirit. And get this, embalmers weren't even allowed to live with other citizens. They were kept apart, in secluded guilds. That could have been social stigma, or it could have been because they regularly handled substances strong enough to shift perception, and maybe didn't come back entirely the same. Over in the corner, a young apprentice carefully places amulets between the wrappings. Each one has a specific spell, but some of them are made from plant paste, lotus, mandrake, cannabis, honey, and are meant to dissolve, to soak into the skin, the cloth, the tomb air. They weren't just spiritual GPS devices. They were delivery systems, medicine for the soul and maybe a little mind expansion for anyone spending too long in the sarcophagus room. And there's another secret nobody really talks about. The natron baths. That's the drying salt that preserved bodies. But sometimes, herbs were mixed into it. Not just for scent. There's one report of thyme, fennel, and even fermented grain being tossed in. It's unclear whether that was to keep insects away, or if someone was trying to create a chemical reaction strong enough to do something more metaphysical. The Book of the Dead speaks of sacred journeys during preparation. Not metaphorical ones, actual journeys, undertaken by priests while in ritual states. The goal? To guide the deceased through the duat, the underworld. Some think these journeys were guided meditations. Others believe psychoactive substances were part of the toolkit. You notice a tiny jar on a high shelf, still sealed with wax. Inside, a dark red gum, possibly extracted from the storax tree. In concentrated form, storax can cause light euphoria and altered sensation. Was it a sedative? A balm for grief? Or something stronger? Here's the wild bit. Ancient graffiti has been found in some embalming workshops, crudely etched phrases like, "the eye opens," or "the two lands become one." Poetic? Probably. Drug-fueled rambling? Maybe. Either way, it suggests these rooms weren't all solemn silence. There may have been ecstatic experiences happening behind these stone doors. Now lean in. There's a fringe theory that embalming wasn't just about the dead. Some believe high-ranking priests underwent partial embalming, not the mummification part, but the preparation. Drinking certain infusions, fasting, applying the same aromatic unguents to their skin, entering darkness for days. A kind of mock death, followed by rebirth. Sounds extreme, but ancient texts reference those who have died but live again in vague, mystical terms. Could this have been a drug-assisted vision quest? A ritualized near-death experience? Historians don't agree. But the ingredients are there: resins, opiates, isolation, chanting, and sensory overload. You watch as the body on the slab is finally wrapped, sealed, and placed in a temporary sarcophagus. The room quiets. One priest pours a final libation, probably beer or wine, maybe laced with lotus. He murmurs a prayer. The air is thick, not just emotionally, chemically. You feel it in your lungs, and you can't help but wonder, if you'd stood here long enough, breathing this air, would you start to see something? The dead stirring? A voice from the gods? A hallway of stars leading out of this world and into the next? Either way, the ancient Egyptians weren't messing around. For them, death wasn't a cut-off, it was a transition. And the embalming chamber? It might have been the bridge, not just for the dead, but for the living. You step out of the embalming chamber still dizzy from the scents, your nose coated with layers of sweet rot and sacred smoke. But there's no break. Someone tugs you down a side alley, past a vendor selling dried figs and goat cheese, into a narrow mud brick house with blue shutters. Inside? A different kind of ritual. A woman kneels on a reed mat, mixing something in a polished alabaster bowl. She adds a pinch of ochre, a splash of vinegar, and a blob of thick black eyeliner paste. Coal. But this isn't for her eyes. It's going straight into her mouth. Welcome to ancient Egypt's multi-purpose drugstore, where anything could be medicine, or magic, or both. And as you're about to find out, the ancient Egyptians didn't just swallow or sip their remedies, they sniffed them, smeared them, and sometimes, well, things got intimate. Let's start with that coal. You know it best as dramatic eye makeup, and sure, it looked incredible under the desert sun. But it was more than style, it was strategy. That paste often contained galena, lead sulfide, which absorbed sunlight, reduced glare, and may have had mild antibacterial properties. But it also might have stimulated nitric oxide production in the skin, a vasodilator that some believe had mood-altering effects. So yes, your eyeliner could have doubled as your anxiety relief. But wait, there's more. You watch as a young couple prepares for what you think is just an evening bath. Instead, the woman grinds a pinch of dried blue lotus petals and mixes it into oil. She rubs it behind her ears, on her wrists, and, yes, on her tongue. Her partner does the same. This wasn't cologne. It was a pre-game ritual for romance, spiritual union, or something far groovier. Lotus oil was known to loosen the limbs and awaken the heart. If that's not code for sensual euphoria, I don't know what is. Next door, someone snorting a line of powdered something. Not cocaine, try dried frankincense resin. Weird, right? But some records suggest this aromatic gum, when ground and inhaled, had mild stimulant effects. Kind of like an ancient espresso shot, with a side of divine protection. There's a shelf of honey pots, each one sealed with wax. But they're not just sweet treats. Inside are garlic cloves, cannabis seeds, and powdered mandrake root, preserved in honey and taken as pills, or smeared into cuts, or inserted where the sun doesn't shine. Seriously. Rectal suppositories were not only a thing, but a favoured delivery method for painkillers, contraceptives, and even mood stabilisers. Crocodile dung was one such ingredient. Yeah, you heard right. Mixed with natron and honey, it formed a sort of pessary used as a protection spell against pregnancy. Was it effective? Historians still argue. Probably not. But symbolically, powerfully disgusting. Here's the thing. The Egyptians didn't see the body as separate from the spirit. So applying a balm to your chest wasn't just about clearing congestion. It was opening your heart chakra, inviting Ma'at, cosmic order, into your lungs. Sniffing something sharp wasn't waking up, it was summoning divine awareness. And then there's the breath work. You see an old man blow smoke from a small clay pipe into a child's ears. It's part of a healing ritual, meant to cast out fever demons. The smoke? A blend of acacia bark and myrrh. Acacia, by the way, contains dimethyltryptamine. Yes, that DMT. in small doses, probably not enough to trigger full-blown visions. But concentrated? Heated? It could have packed a surprising punch. Let's talk fringe for a second. There's one scroll, part medical manual, part spiritual text, that describes a technique called the swallowing of Sekhmet's roar. It sounds poetic, but some researchers believe it refers to drinking a concoction that induced a trance state, a controlled madness inspired by the lion-headed goddess of chaos and war. Others say it's metaphor, not chemistry. But the ingredients listed, mandrake, fermented barley, heated resin, suggest otherwise. You spot a young boy lying on his stomach while his mother traces symbols on his back with a heated needle dipped in lotus paste. It's not permanent, more like temporary tattooing for healing. As she chants softly, the boy slips into sleep, fast. Whether it's from the herbs, the rhythm, or placebo power, you can't say, but the line between treatment and ritual is completely gone. Then there's the wine. Oh, the wine. You think of it as a drink. The Egyptians thought of it as a delivery system, steeped with herbs, resins, and sometimes minerals. Wine became a vehicle for everything from menstrual relief to spiritual visions. There's one record of wine mixed with saffron, cinnamon, lotus, and poppy extract, taken before oracular ceremonies to open the voice of truth. Sounds suspiciously like the precursor to a full-body TED Talk with a twist. Now let's get weirder. Some sacred ointments were smeared directly on statues before rituals, not for decoration. The idea was that gods inhabited the statues, and the narcotic-infused oils were offerings, or perhaps even bait. Was the goal to intoxicate the idol, or the priest touching it? You decide. There's a quiet acknowledgement in every home, every workshop, that substances could shift perception. They weren't always trying to escape reality. They were trying to tune into the divine signal, like fiddling with an old radio dial until the static turned into voices. You end the evening seated beside a herbalist named Sinette. She crushes lotus, cardamom, and a dash of dried henbane into a paste. She offers it to you on the tip of a reed. You hesitate, but take it. It's sweet, bitter, floral, burning. Your mouth tingles. A minute later, everything feels a little slower, softer. The candlelight flickers just a bit more dramatically. Is it working? Or is it just suggestion? Doesn't matter. You feel something ancient open inside your chest. An echo, a shimmer. This isn't medicine. It's memory. And you realise the Egyptians didn't just want to live well. They wanted to feel the full spectrum of existence. Body, mind, and soul. And they weren't afraid to get a little weird to get there. It's morning now, or whatever counts for morning in this timeless haze of incense and desert light. You shuffle along a sun-drenched courtyard, eyes still adjusting after that blue lotus buzz. And just when you think things might calm down, a healer thrusts a glob of sticky brown goo into your hand. You eat, she says flatly. Very good for life. Sevens. You don't ask what's in it. You should have. This is medicine, Egyptian style. Honey, animal fat, frankincense, cumin, mouldy bread, and, wait for it, crocodile dung. That last bit? It's not a prank. It's part of a legit ancient medical recipe, one of many that push the line between brilliant and batshit. You choke it down. The taste is indescribable, somewhere between spicy jam and old feet. But apparently, it cures stomach aches, wards off evil spirits, and boosts fertility. Maybe, or maybe it just makes you so sick you forget your original problem. This wasn't a one-off. Ancient Egyptian medicine was loaded with ingredients that, to modern minds, sound like punishment. Lizard blood, crushed beetles, ground ivory, human hair, even menstrual blood in some rare texts. And dung, from crocodile, donkey, or even hippo, shows up more often than you'd think. Why? Historians still argue whether these were symbolic, antibacterial, or just desperate guesses that stuck. But it wasn't all horror. Egyptian healers were shockingly advanced. They knew how to suture wounds, set bones, treat cataracts, and drain abscesses. They catalogued over 700 remedies in the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical texts in the world. But mixed in with real surgical notes are instructions like boil acacia in milk and apply to forehead to chase away bad dreams. That one? Probably did something. Acacia bark contains DMT precursors. Nightmares be gone, or really get going. You duck into a modest apothecary, walls lined with jars labelled in faded hieratic script. You recognise a few ingredients. Myrrh, cassia, coriander, carob, opium poppy. Others a stranger. A bowl of dried lizard tongues. A lump of tar-like resin that smells like burnt caramel. A bundle of yellowing reeds tied with a red string, rumoured to cure demonic affliction. Whatever that means. On the counter sits a tray of honey balls, small, smooth, and wax-coated. Mystery pills, you hear someone mutter. The recipes are lost, but residue tests on tomb jars suggest these spheres sometimes held cannabis, lotus extract, and even small amounts of lead oxide. That last one? Not so great. But again, the goal wasn't just healing, it was altering, elevating, preparing for dreams, visions, and godly whisperings. A fringe theory claims these pills were microdosed, taken over time to maintain a mild, constant euphoria or state of divine alertness. Kind of like sipping espresso with a splash of enlightenment. Others say the pills were ceremonial, taken during specific lunar phases, fertility rites, or initiations. Now you find yourself in the company of a midwife. She's preparing a salve for childbirth. Olive oil, honey, and something that smells distinctly like cloves and poppy latex. Yes, opium. The Egyptians weren't naive. They knew it killed pain, and they used it. Carefully. Especially during childbirth, dentistry, or in moments of deep grief. Some even say pharaohs were given doses of opium when they lost a child. Not to numb emotion, but to open the gates of divine understanding. Whether it worked or not, let's just say nobody was giving TED Talks afterward. You step into a back room where a scribe is copying down recipes. The parchment lists one cure for insomnia. Boil willow bark in beer, mix with honey and smear upon the tongue. Sound familiar? Willow bark contains salicin, the chemical cousin of aspirin. These people weren't guessing, they were experimenting, and occasionally stumbling into discoveries we wouldn't officially recognise until thousands of years later. But then you see a weirder entry. To forget a lover, burn 3 feathers, drink the ash in wine. Is that medical? Magical? Emotional first aid? All of the above? Here's the truth. Egyptians didn't separate healing, mood, and spiritual alignment. Everything worked together. A potion could cure your belly and balance your soul. A balm could soften your skin and open your heart to Osiris. A suppository could unblock the gates of consciousness. Not kidding, that's actually a phrase found in one scroll. And then there's the visual magic. You find another scribe illustrating a guide to healing amulets. Each one is shaped like a sacred animal or symbol, a scarab, a cat, the eye of Horus. But many were more than jewellery. Some were soaked in herbal oils before being worn or carried. The idea? The charm wasn't just symbolic, it was literally infused with healing energy. Imagine walking around with a wearable diffuser, but ancient and a little more hex-proof. The line between healer and magician gets blurrier the more you look. You hear a chant from the alley and peek out. A healer is spitting wine onto someone's feet while holding a live eel. That's an exorcism, apparently, or a treatment for gout, depending on who you ask. And we haven't even touched on dream salves yet. Before bed, some people would smear a blend of lotus oil, cow fat, and frankincense behind the ears and on the soles of their feet. Not for comfort, for vision enhancement. They believed it would draw divine dreams, or even allow temporary communication with dead relatives. Was it placebo? Hallucination? Some kind of lucid dreaming hack? Modern dreamers and fringe theorists argue it's a lost science, that the Egyptians understood dream-triggering chemistry we're only just rediscovering. You fall asleep on a reed mat with your brain buzzing, skin tingling from the salve, and you think, as the shadows melt into stars above the courtyard, this wasn't medicine the way we know it. It was something deeper, messier, braver, and maybe, in a way, a little bit wiser. You're summoned at dawn, not by rooster, but by the low boom of a temple drum. The sound vibrates in your ribs, earthy and slow, like it's pulling your soul forward. You follow it through winding alleys until you reach a tall gate flanked by painted statues. This isn't the house of a pharaoh or healer. This is the residence of a high priest, and not just any priest. One of the select few considered close enough to the divine to see the gods, not just pray to them. And how did they get there? Let's just say, elevation wasn't only spiritual. You slip past woven curtains into a chamber lined with papyri and incense braziers. The floor is clean sand, raked into perfect spirals. The priest stands at the centre, arms raised, eyes glassy. He doesn't see you. He's already somewhere else. Here's the thing, being a high priest wasn't just about memorizing rituals. It was about access. Not just to temple secrets, but to the best drugs in the land. Wine steeped with mandrake, blue lotus syrup drizzled into honey cakes, hashish resins rolled into sacred offerings. These men were walking pharmacies. A servant offers you a sip of dark, syrupy wine from a ceramic cup shaped like a lion's head. It's warm and floral, with a bitter edge. You instantly feel your pulse slow. Time feels thicker, sound heavier. The priest starts chanting again, and this time the words feel layered, like you can almost hear them in your bones. Historians still argue whether this was religious theatre or genuine altered consciousness. Some believe the substances were mild, symbolic, a placebo. Others are convinced these men were trained to dose precisely, achieving controlled states of trance, where divine visions felt realer than waking life. You're invited into a side room, small, dim, with coloured glass slats filtering gold and blue light across the walls. The air smells like pine resin and something earthier, vaguely metallic. On a low altar sits a stone bowl of smouldering incense. You recognise the sweet, sharp smell. Kaifi, again, but this batch has a strange undertone. Poppy, maybe, or henbane. The high priest kneels beside it, eyes closed, breathing deep and slow. The smoke swirls around his face like a living thing. You follow his lead. It burns your lungs a little. Then your limbs get warm. You feel the floor shift slightly. Or maybe that's you. This wasn't abuse. It was technique. The priests trained for this, fasting for days, meditating, purging their bodies with herbal cleanses. By the time they entered ritual space, their minds were already half unhooked. The incense just nudged them the rest of the way. One scroll tucked under a cushion describes the ritual of the unfolding eye. It instructs the reader to consume a mixture of crushed myrrh, mandrake root, and fermented pomegranate wine. The purpose? To pierce the veil and see the flame beings who walk behind all things. Sounds like an ayahuasca session with a better wardrobe. Fringe theorists eat this stuff up. Some argue the Egyptian priesthood were proto-psychonauts, mapping consciousness through years of ritual, chemistry, and architecture. They point to temple designs that resemble neural pathways, sound chambers tuned to brainwave frequencies, even murals that resemble DMT fractals. Is it proof? Or projection? Scholars still debate it furiously. You notice the priest's fingers twitching in a precise pattern. It's not random. It's a mudra, a symbolic gesture, like sacred sign language. Some believe these were designed to shape the trance, guiding thoughts, stabilizing the vision. Combined with psychoactive sense and chants, it became a kind of manual override for reality. Not all highs were about ecstasy. Some were designed to humble. To see the face of Ma'at, one priest explains, you must first dissolve the self. Translation: get ready to let go. One old tale describes a priest locked in a dark chamber for 3 days, surviving on nothing but lotus wine and bitter roots. When he emerged, he could hear the stars sing. You wonder if he also couldn't feel his legs. But here's something even bolder. Some temples had initiation pits, underground rooms where neophytes were left alone, sometimes buried up to their necks, given dream salves and vision wine, and told to face their shadow. It wasn't torture, it was transformation. Lose the ego, see the divine, or lose your mind, depending on the batch. You explore a dusty library of sorts, shelves of reed scrolls with barely legible ink. One catches your eye, the voice that does not lie. It's part instruction manual, part riddle. It mentions inhaling the white breath of the cedars and listening for whispers from Thoth himself. Some passages read like a trip report, others sound more like therapy. Then there's the silence. The high priest often spent hours, even days, in enforced silence after a ritual trip. Not just to recover, but to listen. They believed the divine answers didn't shout. They whispered, inside dreams, behind language, beneath thought. Outside the chamber, the sun is high now, beating down on limestone tiles. You blink, eyes still adjusting. The priest finally looks at you. His eyes are bloodshot, yes, but calm, rooted, like someone who just returned from a place you'll never visit, but who isn't afraid anymore. He hands you a tiny bundle wrapped in linen. Inside is a dried petal, a pinch of powder, and a carved symbol. For insight, he murmurs. You're not sure what to do with it. Maybe that's the point. In the world of the high priests, knowledge wasn't memorized, it was felt. Wisdom wasn't passed down, it was entered. And sometimes, to see the truth of the universe, you had to go so deep inside yourself that the lines blurred. Between mind and spirit, between sacred and strange, between waking and whatever came next. The Nile sparkles under the late afternoon sun as you step onto a wide barge carved with lotus patterns and painted gold at the prow. Musicians are already playing, flutes, lyres, and those deep hand drums that seem to sync with your heartbeat. This isn't a funeral procession or a holy ritual. This is a party, and the pharaoh is throwing it. You've heard about Egyptian festivals, big, colourful, perfumed affairs. But this is full-on luxury hedonism, ancient style. Gilded goblets clink, perfume clouds hang over silk canopies, and everywhere you turn, there's wine, music, laughter, and a few things you really didn't expect. Let's start with the food. Tables groan with roasted goose, figs stuffed with honey and nuts, and something called lotus bread. That last one looks innocent, smells sweet, tastes floral, and, as you quickly learn, hits like a gentle wave of warm cotton because it's baked with blue lotus paste. Subtle, euphoric, and just trippy enough to make the lyre player's music shimmer a little more than it should. The young noblewoman offers you a wreath of delight, a crown woven from lotus and mandrake leaves, laced with oil. Wear this, she says, and your dreams will dance with Hathor. You oblige, and almost instantly, your senses feel dialed up. Colours pop. Voices echo a beat longer. That roasted goose suddenly smells amazing. Here's what they don't tell you in textbooks. Elite feasts in Egypt weren't just about food and gossip. They were orchestrated sensory feasts, perfumes, music, textures, substances, all blended into what scholars now suspect may have been engineered intoxication. Not accidental. Intentional. Designed. A scholar once called these events controlled chaos under sacred disguise. Historians still argue whether the psychoactive ingredients were truly widespread or reserved for the ultra-elite. But all signs suggest the royal inner circle had access to recipes most people only whispered about. You spot the pharaoh himself reclining under a gauze canopy. He's wearing lapis lazuli eyeliner and sipping from a silver cup. A servant brings him a cake the size of your hand, marked with a small glyph that means joy or delight, depending on the context. Someone nearby whispers that the cake is a blend of dates, honey, crushed poppy seeds, and fermented lotus wine. You do the math. That's one slow burn dose right there. Let's talk about poppy for a second. The Egyptians cultivated it. They harvested the latex. They dried it. They knew its effects. Whether used for pain relief, sleep, or sacred intoxication, it was no accident. In higher doses, it could sedate. In small doses, it could soften the edges of reality. Now, mix that with music. The sistrum rattles begin, those curved, jangling metal instruments associated with goddesses like Hathor and Bastet. The rhythm isn't fast. It's hypnotic, repetitive, designed to lull the body and unlock something deeper. You feel your foot start tapping without realizing. Your breath sinks. Your body settles. Your mind starts floating. And just like that, you're swept into an ancient vibe session. Fringe theorists love to claim these festivals were covert consciousness expansion workshops. They say the high was never just the wine, it was the environment, the rhythm, the group mind, that once everyone reached a certain frequency, they began to share vision space, kind of like a flash mob hallucination. Mainstream historians, more cautious. They agree Egyptian parties were immersive, sensorially overwhelming, and definitely involved wine steeped with herbs, but they stop short of calling it a full-blown trip. The debate rages on. Meanwhile, back on the barge, a dancer takes the floor. She's painted in shimmering gold dust and wears a mask of Hathor. Her movements are slow, serpentine. Her anklets jingle softly. She drips oil from a small vial as she moves, drops that fall on the fire bowls and sizzle up into perfume smoke. You catch a whiff. It's not incense. It's a popanax, also called sweet myrrh. In low doses, calming. In high doses, reportedly disorienting. There's debate about whether the dancers use these scents to subliminally shift the crowd, or maybe the crowd didn't need much help. They were already there. You stumble into a cluster of cushions where poets are trading verses. One of them hands you a scroll with a hymn to Hathor. It starts out romantic, then veers hard into mystic revelation. Lines like, "My heart flies on wings of the flower. I am inside the sun, and the sun is inside me." Sevens. Subtle. No, but evocative. You start to realise these weren't just party favours, they were mindset tools. Recipes were chosen based on lunar phases, festival type, and even seasonal winds. There are mentions of windborne spirits only visible when certain herbs were burned at dusk. Were these just metaphors for feelings? Or descriptions of hallucinations? Nobody agrees. And remember that mandrake wreath? You catch a reflection of yourself in a bowl of wine, and your pupils are massive. The sun sets, and the breeze off the Nile feels like velvet. Somewhere between sips and stars, the world bends a little. This isn't a hangover in the making. This is ritualized indulgence, wrapped in gold thread and set to music. No one's puking in the reeds. Everyone moves like they're floating, halfway between Earth and wherever Hathor lives. You lie back on a cushion. The boat sways gently. The stars above look closer. Maybe they are closer. And for just a second, you understand why the Egyptians threw these festivals. Not just for celebration, but for transcendence. You wake to sunlight filtered through linen, the sound of distant lyres, and the lingering scent of lotus. Still on the barge. Still drifting. And next to you, a bowl of petals, blue, radiant, damp with dew or maybe oil. The blue lotus again. It's everywhere. In the drinks. in the garlands, painted on tomb walls, carved into sarcophagi, tucked between the toes of mummies. It floats in wine, curls in incense, and shows up in love poems as a metaphor for pleasure, peace, and the soul awakening. But why this flower? Why always this flower? You crush a petal between your fingers. It smells faintly like licorice and earth. Not exactly strong, but somehow potent, symbolically, spiritually, maybe chemically. Let's talk effects. Today, scientists know blue lotus contains aporphine, a compound that stimulates dopamine receptors and induces mild euphoria, relaxation, and, in some reports, dreamlike clarity. It's not LSD. It's not mushrooms. But in the right setting, after fasting, with rhythmic music and enough wine, yeah, you're going to feel something. The ancient Egyptians knew that. They didn't have molecular chemistry, but they had centuries of experience. And the experience said, this flower was special. You find yourself in a perfumer's workshop. Clay pots, reed baskets, dried herbs hanging from the rafters. In one jar, concentrated blue lotus oil. Thick, golden, sticky. It stirred into wine, dripped onto the skin, even used in eye makeup. Some texts suggest it helped open the inner eye. Whether that's poetic or pharmacological depends who you ask. Historians still argue whether blue lotus had strong psychoactive effects or if it was just a mild relaxant hyped into mythology. Some say it's all romanticism. Others point to the sheer volume of references, dozens of tombs, temples, and steely depict people smelling, drinking, or holding the flower like it's the key to something. And here's the kicker. The Egyptians never wrote down exactly how they used it. Recipes are vague, doses unlisted, as if the knowledge was meant to be felt, not explained. You duck into a temple of Hathor, where priestesses in flowing robes prepare a ritual bath. Blue lotus petals float on the surface, along with frankincense, cinnamon, and what smells like orange rind. You dip a hand in, warm, fragrant, intoxicating. This wasn't just skincare. It was spiritual marination. There's an inscription above the basin. The flower opens when the light enters the eye. Which eye? The literal one. The third one? Historians still can't agree. Outside, in a shaded garden, two boys chase each other with garlands of lotus flowers, laughing. One of them pauses to bite a petal. Not a snack, more like an impulse. You realise that this wasn't just sacred stuff. People lived with this flower, wove it into daily life, smoked it, brewed it, laid it on graves. You find a scroll in a healer's satchel. A dream journal? Maybe. Each entry starts with a sip of wine steeped in lotus. Each dream more vivid than the last. One describes flying above the Nile, watching boats pass like glowing beetles. Another sees gods made of fire and water weaving the stars together. Are these hallucinations? Symbolic visions? Or just dreams? Fringe theories? Oh, they go hard on blue lotus. Some say it was used to induce lucid dreams, the kind where you can shape your own experience. Others argue it was combined with other herbs and secret formulas lost to time. There are rumours of hidden texts, the Lotus Scrolls, that teach how to mix lotus with poppy or acacia for full-blown mystical states. No proof, of course, but the idea persists. You walk through a garden maze behind a nobleman's house. The path winds through rows of flowering plants, but always comes back to the central pond, full of lotus. He kneels beside it, drinks from a cup, and murmurs, "To forget the weight." You're not sure if he means grief, guilt, or just being awake. And then you realise the flower wasn't just for highs, it was for balance, to soften the edges of existence, to allow emotion, reflection, and maybe even revelation. It wasn't about escaping the world, It was about slipping sideways and catching your breath. Back in the temple, you find a painting of a god with a lotus blooming from his mouth. The caption says, "He who speaks from the flower knows no lies." It's not about getting high. It's about accessing something pure, honest, quiet. You lie down in the grass, a petal on your tongue. It's slightly bitter, astringent, but within minutes, your breath slows. The sun warms your face. The world doesn't blur, but it softens. The sound of birds gets richer. The wind feels personal, and that's when you understand. The Egyptians weren't chasing fireworks. They were chasing tuning, alignment, connection to something deeper, older, just beneath the surface of everything. That's why the blue lotus mattered. Not because it was powerful, but because it was gentle. And in a world full of chaos, war, sandstorms, and snake gods, sometimes gentle was the most sacred thing of all. You walk into a building that looks like a temple but smells like a pharmacy, the House of Life. Don't let the name fool you. This was more than a hospital, more than a school. It was an ancient Egyptian data centre, spiritual hotline, and biochemical playground all rolled into one. Inside, shelves line the walls, each one stacked with jars, pouches, scrolls, and baskets. Some are labelled with clear intentions to reduce fevers, to awaken the heart, to close the womb. Others are more cryptic. Breath of the hawk, night flower sigh, Ra's second tongue. You're definitely not in CVS anymore. You shadow a scribe healer as he measures out ingredients for what he calls a storm calmer. It includes wine steeped with mandrake, frankincense, and a dark root you're told must be boiled under moonlight. Superstition? Maybe. Or maybe an early understanding of plant chemistry and circadian potency. He hands it to a nervous-looking man with shaking hands. Within minutes of sipping, the man exhales and slumps into peace. Real or placebo? Who cares? It's working. The House of Life wasn't just treating wounds. It was modulating consciousness. Doctors, if we can call them that, combined botany, astronomy, incantation, and intuition. They were part pharmacist, part therapist, part oracle. You lean over a scroll detailing dozens of ingredients. Opium, cannabis, henbane, acacia, saffron, frankincense, myrrh, licorice root, mouldy barley, hello, ergot, and blue lotus, always. Some were brewed, others smoked, some rubbed on the chest or the soles of the feet. One even required applying it to the fontanelle, the soft spot on a baby's skull. There's a thick book of recipes for clearing bad winds from the head. Translation: treating mental illness. Some remedies aim to calm, others to stimulate. One mix calls for dried lizard tongue, mandrake syrup, and breast milk. Another, more famously, involves crushed beetle wings soaked in red wine and drunk while staring into a mirror. Fringe? Yes. But creative? Absolutely. Here's the kicker. These weren't isolated guesses. Recipes were passed down, copied, refined. Healers tested them, logged reactions, even tailored them to zodiac signs. You start to realise this was intentional chemistry, not just mysticism. There's a treatment called the lion's pulse. It combines ground poppy latex, burned frankincense, and a crushed amulet soaked in date wine. The patient is told to lie still and count backward from the stars. A dream state cure, maybe, or a low-tech sedation trip. Either way, you're dying to try it. A healer proudly shows you his spice drawer. He explains how combining sandalwood with cinnamon and galbanum incense makes patients more open to suggestion, hypnosis, coercion, ritual therapy. Historians still argue whether these effects were psychological or chemical, or if the Egyptians cared about the difference. Here's something wild. Acacia appears in dozens of these treatments. Its bark contains precursors to DMT. In small amounts, probably harmless, but concentrated, heated, mixed with wine or resins. You've got a candidate for visions, if not full-on mystical fireworks. You follow a patient into a dark room filled with hanging plants. A soft drum beat plays in the background. He's offered a tincture of poppy and lotus and pomegranate juice. A priest whispers in his ear. See the door open. He drinks. The shadows stretch. You can feel the room change. The theory goes like this. The House of Life didn't just fix your body. It adjusted your soul's frequency. They didn't use terms like anxiety or trauma. They talked about demons, blocked energy, bad winds. But the treatments? Frighteningly similar to modern psychiatric care, plus a dose of spiritual pageantry and a lot more incense. And don't forget cannabis, found in residue from temple incense burners. Mentioned in texts about quieting the mind and smoothing the nerves. Some scholars suggest it was blended into oils used during massage therapy. Imagine ancient therapists rubbing cannabis-infused oil into your scalp while chanting spells about rebirth. Honestly, you'd book a session. Of course, not everyone agrees. Some say these plants were used in such tiny doses that the effects were symbolic, not chemical. Others believe the doses were deliberately hidden behind poetic metaphors. Instead of poppy sap, they'd say milk of the sleep god. Instead of cannabis, they'd write green fire or field smoke. You poke your head into the burning room, where old scrolls get ritually destroyed once copied. The air smells like cedar, myrrh, and papyrus. A healer burns a failed potion, too unstable, he says. Makes the breath stutter. You think that means seizures? One shelf is locked. You're told only initiates may see what's inside. You lean close, squinting through the slats. You see black vials. One is labelled with the glyph for starfall. Another, the voice of Sobek. Sounds more like alchemy than medicine, and maybe it is. There's a patient reciting a spell while applying a balm to his forehead. He says it helps him see his past lives. Is it working? He's crying, not in pain, in release. You sit beside him and smell the balm. Definitely blue lotus. Maybe frankincense. Probably more. And then, in a shadowed corner, you find a carved tablet. Not large, not ornate. Just a message. Sevens. The body holds the door. The plant gives the key. The god opens the room. Sevens. 3 parts. 3 functions. 1 philosophy. You leave the House of Life feeling like you just walked out of a modern wellness centre crossed with a rave and a mystery school. The smells cling to you. So do the whispers. And the truth? These people weren't afraid of altered states. They harnessed them. You're led through a garden tangled with flowering vines, past a fountain carved with kissing doves, and into a cool, shaded chamber glowing with polished bronze mirrors. The scent here is unlike anything you've smelled, heady, citrusy, with a deep, musky base that sticks in your nose and your memory. You've arrived at the private retreat of Cleopatra Zevon, the last active pharaoh of Egypt, and possibly the ancient world's most famous chemistry experiment in human form. Forget the snakes and eyeliner for a moment. Tonight, you're going deep into her elixirs, rituals, and drug-enhanced seduction routines that would make a modern influencer blush. You sit in a corner as attendants buzz around the queen, massaging scented oils into her skin, brushing powdered gold onto her collarbone, and sprinkling crushed rose petals over her bathwater. But this isn't vanity, it's strategy. Cleopatra didn't just look divine. She designed herself to smell, taste, and feel like a living goddess. And at the centre of it all, a personal apothecary so complex it makes your head spin. Let's talk perfume, Cleopatra's secret weapon. Her signature blend, Susanum, was a combination of blue lotus, myrrh, cinnamon, and moringa oil, aged for months in alabaster jars. It didn't just smell nice. It soaked into the skin, warming with body heat, and some historians believe the lotus base gave it a mild narcotic edge. Subtle enough not to knock anyone over, strong enough to make Caesar sit up straight. Fringe theorists go further, claiming she dosed her perfumes with aphrodisiacs, including mandrake, cardamom, and possibly a trace of opium. And why not? This was a queen who famously had herself smuggled inside a carpet to seduce a Roman general. She wasn't winging it. She was chemically choreographing desire. On her nightstand, if queens had nightstands, you find trays of dried petals, tiny wine flasks, and honeyed lozenges wrapped in silk. These weren't candies. They were love spells you could swallow. You try one. It's chewy, bitter, with an aftertaste like licorice and cloves. Within minutes, your chest warms, your thoughts slow. That bronze mirror, suddenly mesmerizing. One scroll lists a potion for shifting the lover's gaze. It includes crushed date seeds, cinnamon bark, myrrh, and a drop of menstrual blood. Yeah, really. As a spell, it's old magic. As a chemical experience, unclear. Historians still debate whether it worked through psychology or pharmacology. Either way, it's bold. You're shown a silver dish used in Cleopatra's bath rituals. She bathed daily in a mix of donkey milk, honey, and lotus oil. Science tells us the lactic acid exfoliated her skin, but some suspect the fermented milk also released mood-lifting compounds. Not exactly Prozac, but in an age without antidepressants. Not nothing. And let's not skip the wine. Cleopatra's wines were not your average village jug. They were infused with herbs, flowers, and, some claim, psychoactive resins. One particularly infamous vintage was known as the Sycamore Kiss, rumoured to produce erotic dreams and prophetic insight. One historian describes it as dreamy, heady, and known to end conversations in unexpected silences. Sevens. You can see the queen herself now, lying back on a carved ivory couch. Her eyes half closed. A flute player sits nearby, barely touching the reed. The music drips like honey. The air smells of burning resin and citrus. A servant fans her with ostrich feathers dipped in perfume. You start to feel like time has slowed. Was this real? Was it calculated? Both? Cleopatra didn't separate power from presence. Her body was her billboard. Her scent a political tool. Her drugs. Just another extension of her rule. Some claim she studied texts from the House of Life. Others say she wrote her own manuals, scrolls that were burned when the Library of Alexandria fell. But some recipes survived. Papyrus fragments mention her facial balm. Beeswax, sea salt, lotus resin, and rose oil, said to cause the reflection to smile back. Narcissism? Or a euphoric reaction to psychoactive oil? Nobody knows. Now get this. There's a fringe theory that Cleopatra experimented with acacia root for visionary states. One account, likely exaggerated, suggests she consulted the hawk spirit of Ra while under its influence. Trance? Poisoning? Creative branding? Historians roll their eyes. But you wonder. The line between myth and medicine blurs hard here. You slip away from the Queen's chamber and find a quiet alcove. There's a small stone bench, a bowl of incense, and a scroll titled "To Seal the Lover's Soul." You read it aloud, just for fun. Immediately, the flame flickers sideways. Coincidence? Or chemistry? You lean back, dizzy from scent and story, and you realise Cleopatra wasn't just beautiful, powerful, or smart. She was deliberate. She didn't wait for magic. She wore it, bathed in it, inhaled it, poured it into goblets and slipped it beneath tongues. Every scent, every sip, every salve, part of a larger design to bend perception, to leave no boundary between human and divine. And if the world couldn't handle it, too bad. The rattle reaches you before you even open your eyes, a dry, metallic chi-chi-chi sound that hits something ancient in your chest. It's not loud, not aggressive, but it grabs hold of your spine and pulls. That's the sistrum, the sacred rattle of Egypt. You follow its echo into a courtyard glowing with early morning light. Priestesses of Hathor dance slowly in white linen, the sistrum raised in one hand, the other tracing spirals in the air. Their feet barely touch the ground. You feel like you've stepped into a frequency, not a place. And you're about to learn this wasn't just music. It was hypnosis. The sistrum looks simple, metal loops strung across a horseshoe-shaped frame, but when played rhythmically, it creates a vibration that's hard to ignore. Not quite a bell, not quite a shaker. It pulses. It threads into your brain. The Egyptians believed the sistrum could soothe the gods, wake dormant energy, and banish chaos. But modern researchers, they suspect something else entirely. Entrainment. That is, the brain's tendency to sync with rhythmic patterns, especially repetitive, high-frequency sound. Essentially, a neurological override. You sit near the dancers and close your eyes. The rattle starts slow, then builds, then locks in. You feel it behind your eyes, buzzing like a soft alarm clock that forgot to turn off. Your thoughts slow. Breathing deepens. You're not asleep, but you're not all the way here either. A priest kneels beside you and whispers, "Don't resist. Let the sound carry you." Sevens. There's debate about whether the Egyptians understood what we'd call brainwave states, alpha, theta, delta. Probably not in those terms. But they knew that rhythm changed consciousness, that certain patterns led to trance, to clarity, to visions, and that's where the sistrum came in. Not as a noisemaker, but as a neurological tuning fork. You watch as one priestess waves the sistrum over a reclining patient's body, slowly moving from head to foot. This isn't a performance. It's a healing. No touch. No words. Just vibration. After 5 minutes, the patient opens his eyes, calm, unfocused, like he just woke from a lucid dream. Sound therapy? Primitive EEG hacking? Historians still argue. Some say it was just symbolic, a musical prayer. Others point to studies showing repetitive percussive sound can trigger light dissociation. Translation. That floating feeling you get when sound becomes space. There's an older woman teaching 2 children to play the sistrum in perfect rhythm. She claps her hands between beats, demanding focus. One of the children's eyes start to glaze a little. You realise you're watching a training session in trance induction. Not just drumming lessons. Mind control, ancient style. And then comes the scent, sweet, peppery, almost vinegary, from a nearby bowl of burning resin. Styrax, mixed with myrrh and cedar. The priestess playing the sistrum walks through the smoke, inhaling deeply before shaking again. The sound shifts. It's subtle, slower, deeper, more inside. Here's where it gets weirder. One scroll you find mentions the opening of the mind through the voice of metal. It describes the sistrum as a tool for releasing knots in the shadow soul. Another source says the sound was used in interrogation to disorient or loosen tongues during sensitive talks. Espionage via rattle? Fringe theory, sure, but tempting. You're invited to sit in a ritual circle. You're handed your own sistrum. It feels weird at first, clumsy, like shaking a toy. But as you find the rhythm, the world dulls around the edges. Each shake becomes a breath. Each breath, a beat. Each beat, a tunnel. You feel your fingers buzzing, your thoughts narrowing. This isn't music. This is alteration. One of the dancers begins chanting, a slow, looping phrase in Middle Egyptian. You don't understand the words, but the rhythm grabs you. and with it, something slips. A thought you didn't know you had drops out. You forget what time it is, or where your legs are. You're floating, stone still, but moving somewhere. It's not scary. It's clean. Historians say this kind of induced trance may have been used in healing temples, a way to let the spirits speak. Patients would describe visions, feelings, sometimes specific organs speaking their pain. Was it placebo? Theatre? Or a kind of ancient, rhythm-fueled psychotherapy? The Egyptians didn't care about diagnosis in the modern sense. They cared about imbalance of the body, the car, the bar. If rhythm restored that, great. If it took a few shakes and a little smoke to get there, even better. A whisper from a priest says, in the right hands, the sistrum is more powerful than a knife. You wonder if he's being poetic, or literal. Some suspect it was used in initiation rites, playing the sistrum at dawn while initiates lay blindfolded, breathing incense, fasting for days, not as torture, as preparation, sound as doorway, metal as midwife for rebirth. You walk away unsteady, not dizzy, not high, just shuffled, like something inside you has been rearranged, and you're not totally sure in what order. The sistrum doesn't fade from your ears. Not yet. It rings like memory, like a frequency that got in and decided to stay. And you begin to understand something. Sevens. The Egyptians didn't need to shout, or shock, or burn things down to shake your reality. Sometimes, all they needed, sevens, was a rattle. The sun dips low, casting long, golden stripes through a lattice window. You're inside a modest home this time, not a temple, not a palace. Just a quiet place where everyday magic happens. On the table in front of you, tiny clay pots, carved amulets, a bowl of oil, and a strip of linen covered in faint, scribbled spells. You're here to witness one of the most overlooked, most intimate rituals in all of ancient Egypt. The merging of spells, amulets, and narcotic oils into one quiet force that shaped daily life more than any crown or pyramid ever did. An old woman with long silver hair leans over a bowl, grinding herbs with a carved pestle. She hums softly, a lullaby, a prayer, maybe both. You ask what she's making. For the heart, she says, and the dreams. Sevens. She lifts a pot of oil, thick, golden, glinting with flecks of powdered resin, and adds a handful of dried blue lotus petals. Then something else. A soft clump of mandrake root, carved into the shape of a tiny person. She murmurs the name of Hathor under her breath. This isn't medicine. This is protection. You look around. Hanging above the threshold is a carved eye of Horus, darkened with age. It's coated with oil. You touch it. Your fingers tingle slightly. She catches your glance. It sees bad things before they happen, she says. But it sees better with the oil. Sevens, turns out. Many Egyptian amulets weren't just symbolic. They were interactive, regularly anointed with herbal blends designed to enhance their power, awaken the symbol, or just keep the vibe tuned. Kind of like charging a crystal, except with cannabis resin and chants in Middle Egyptian. Some of these oils were narcotic, not just to protect the amulet, but to affect the wearer. One scroll describes an amulet of protection for warriors that must be soaked in oil made from cannabis, myrrh, and goose fat. The idea? Strap it to your chest before battle. You won't feel fear, or much of anything. One teenager leans over and rubs oil onto his amulet, then smears a little under his nose. His eyes flutter. For calm, he says. You flip through a household spell book, a tattered papyrus full of everyday instructions. How to cure a fever, banish a nightmare, attract a lover, keep scorpions from your bed. But next to each spell, a scent. a plant, a note like burn with incense of shadowed cedar, or speak with honey and lotus oil on the tongue. Sevens. That's the twist. These weren't just spells. They were recipes for altered state activation. You didn't just speak magic, you inhaled it, wore it, became it. There's one particular blend described as oil for clarity before judgment. Ingredients: blue lotus, galbanum, crushed red carnelian, yes, the stone, and a drop of fig sap. Rubbed on the temples before speaking to a high official or praying at the shrine. Was it literal clarity? Or emotional armour? Historians still argue whether these oils had measurable effects. Some dismiss them as perfume. Others think we're underestimating the cumulative power of these rituals. A little lotus oil, a little mandrake, an incantation timed with the moon. You might not trip, but your reality will tilt, just enough to feel the gods watching. Let's get weirder. One home altar shows signs of wear, faint scorch marks from incense, a soot line along the back wall. In front of it, a small stone cat figurine. Bastet, goddess of protection. There's oil smeared under her eyes. When asked why, the homeowner says, so she sees clearly. That oil smells like cannabis and pine. Not traditional ingredients, but maybe not accidental. You learn of a ritual for soothing a screaming child. It involves tying an amulet carved from carob wood around the child's neck, then massaging their feet with poppy seed oil while chanting a phrase involving the god Bez. It sounds like childcare, but it also sounds suspiciously like microdosing opium via baby massage. Some fringe theorists have taken it a step further. They argue that ancient Egyptians practiced early forms of olfactory programming, associating specific scents with spiritual states, then anchoring those states with repeated ritual until just the scent itself triggered transformation. Sounds like New Age psychobabble until you remember. We do this all the time. With music. With cologne. With the smell of someone you loved. You find a bundle of linen strips in a basket, each one embroidered with glyphs. They're prayer ties. But before use, they're soaked in oil, often spiked with blue lotus or saffron. You're told that burning one while praying could bring on visions. Or at least, dreams worth remembering. In one corner, a girl whispers into her amulet, then rubs it against her chest. It's shaped like a scarab. Her mother warns her not to use too much oil. Last time she floated, she says. Floated? As in, emotionally? Spiritually? Pharmacologically? All three, probably. You leave with oil still on your fingers. It tingles. Not painful. Just buzzing. Like it knows something you don't. Like it's waiting to show you. And you realise the ancient Egyptians didn't separate magic and chemistry. Not even close. They layered them. Oil enhanced the amulet. The amulet amplified the spell. The spell bent reality. And the person, whether healer, priest, or barefoot mother, became the bridge. Not by accident, by design. You're hungry now. Like, actually hungry. Not metaphysically, not emotionally, but real my stomach just made a weird noise. Hungry. So you follow your nose into the open courtyard of a village house, where clay ovens smoke and the smell of fresh bread and warm beer curls into the air like an edible invitation. You're about to learn something sacred and slightly terrifying. Sevens. The ancient Egyptians weren't just great builders, mystics, and embalming champions. They were fermentation fanatics. And the stuff they brewed and baked, sometimes healing, sometimes intoxicating, sometimes accidentally hallucinogenic. Let's start with beer, the lifeblood of Egypt. Everyone drank it. Pharaohs, farmers, kids. Even the gods got beer in their altars. But this wasn't your crisp, ice-cold lager. It was thick, cloudy, tangy. Like a smoothie and a sourdough starter had a rebellious child. You watch a woman stir a vat of grain mash. The smell is pungent, earthy, yeasty, almost fruity. She adds dates and what looks like wild herbs. Good for the body, she says, and for soft dreams. Sevens. You drink a cup. It's warm, sharp, and after 10 minutes you feel it in your bones. Not drunk, exactly. Just softened, floaty. Like the edges of things are slightly less sharp than they were a moment ago. Here's what modern researchers have found. Egyptian beer was often fermented quickly, at high temperatures, using wild yeasts and sometimes spoiled grain. That spoiled grain occasionally grew a fungus called ergot, the same base compound from which LSD was synthesized thousands of years later. Did they know? Probably not. But they knew something happened when the beer sat too long, or when specific moulds formed on barley. There are records of dream beer given to temple initiates. Other recipes mention beer of madness, used in rituals for exorcism. Coincidence? Or low-grade, ancient psychedelia. Historians still argue. Now let's talk about the bread. You sit next to a young baker pulling loaves from a clay oven. The crusts are golden, the inside soft and dark. One loaf is dusted with what looks like poppy seeds. Another has a faint green-blue fuzz on its edges. The baker frowns, then shrugs. For the old woman, he says. She likes the dreams. Sevens. That fuzz. Likely mould. Could be harmless. Could also be penicillium, hello, early antibiotics, or, again, ergot. You're starting to see a pattern. Ancient Egyptian kitchens weren't sterile. They were alive, full of yeasts, bacteria, spores, and spontaneous chemistry. Every batch of bread or beer was its own microbrewery of mystery. Some scrolls refer to the bread that opens the gates. It was used in funerary rites, possibly soaked in wine or oil and placed on the tongues of the dead, or eaten by the living during rituals. Was it symbolic? Sure. Was it psychoactive? Possibly, especially if left to ferment in the heat long enough. You hear a story from a local priest about a woman who spoke with the ibis god after eating temple bread left in a shrine for 3 days. Spoiled food? Maybe. Sacred communion? Also maybe. The line between the two was often one ingredient away. Back in the kitchen, you're handed a snack called honey bites, small bread balls soaked in lotus syrup and rolled in crushed dates. Delicious. And definitely mood-altering. Within minutes, your limbs feel warm. Your jaw unclenches. The woman beside you is telling a joke about crocodiles, and it's the funniest thing you've heard all day. Now, here's the twist. None of this was sold as a trip. There were no warnings, no rituals involving glowing-eyed priests and incense-heavy trance sessions. This was just lunch. And that's the point. The ancient Egyptians lived inside their chemistry. They didn't always chase altered states. Sometimes they just cooked them. There's a fringe theory that temple bakers were secret alchemists monitoring moisture, temperature, and grain types to induce specific mental states in their customers. Probably a stretch. But it is true that some temples had their own breweries, and priests were often in charge of recipes. One record describes a blend of wheat, fenugreek, and the tears of the desert flower, a poetic name for mandrake juice, baked into bread, fed to mourners, not to numb pain, to walk with the dead one more time. Sevens. You visit a shrine where such bread is offered. The priest leaves a loaf near the statue's feet, then drinks beer from a painted cup. He slurs the final chant a little. His eyes flutter closed. Not disrespect. Just immersion. Another recipe calls for barley mixed with lion's blood. Probably not literal blood, maybe a metaphor for a strong psychoactive ingredient. Saffron, henbane, a now lost root known only to temple kitchens. The guesses are endless. The results, apparently, unforgettable. Even children's food wasn't exempt. A porridge for colicky babies lists poppy extract as an ingredient. Just a drop. To soothe the cries, the recipe says. Would it work? Yes. Would modern doctors approve? Probably not. You lean back, hands sticky with date syrup, belly full of ancient carbs, and realise you're feeling more than full. You're buzzing, but not in a sharp, artificial way. More like a drone beneath your thoughts. A hum of yeast, honey, flour, grain. Something old moving through your bloodstream, like you're fermenting from the inside out. And you start to get it. Food wasn't just survival. It was access. Bread was prayer. Beer was memory. Mould was magic. And every meal, a ritual. Night has fallen, but this isn't the kind of sleep that comes with silence. The temple of Serapis hums with low chants, footsteps padding over sandstone, the clink of oil lamps being refilled. You pass through a narrow hall lined with painted stars and feel the atmosphere shift, like the walls themselves are holding their breath. You've arrived at a dream incubation temple, a place where sleep wasn't just rest. It was ritual, prophecy, and occasionally a chemically enhanced hotline to the gods. You're handed a strip of linen soaked in oil and told to tie it around your forehead. To open the night eye, the priest says, smiling in that unnerving way people do when they know something you don't. You comply, because why not? The oil stings a little. Smells like blue lotus, poppy resin, maybe cardamom. You're led into a dark room filled with mats and bodies, some curled under thin blankets, others lying flat, eyes wide, waiting for sleep like it's a train they've summoned. The priest offers a small cup, pomegranate wine laced with a syrupy extract. Sweet, but earthy. Your mouth tingles. And just like that, your role in this performance is locked in. This isn't bedtime. It's divination. Dream incubation, or temple sleep, was practiced across ancient Egypt, especially in temples of Imhotep, Thoth, and Serapis. You didn't just come to pray, you came to dream on purpose, to receive healing, guidance, a message from the divine. And sometimes, those dreams got a little help. Scrolls described various pre-sleep rituals, herbal baths, oil massages, fasting, even abstinence for days. Why? To purify the body, sure, but also to make the mind more permeable, more open, more tuned. You lie down. The mat's thin but surprisingly comfortable. Above you, the ceiling glows faintly with gold-painted stars. A priest walks through, sprinkling water that smells like rose and fennel. He whispers a few words. Call Thoth. Let the feather fall. Somewhere in the room, someone giggles in their sleep. And then come the dreams. You feel them arrive, not emerge, like they're entering you, not bubbling up. The imagery is strange, immediate, wings, sand that moves like liquid, a door that opens into fire, but the fire sings. You wake before dawn, heart pounding, a glyph burned into your memory. You don't know what it means, but the priests do. One of them listens to your halting explanation, nods, and says, "You are heard." He writes something down. You don't ask what. You're still half there. Historians love to debate what was really going on in these temples. Were people high? Hypnotized? Simply sleep-deprived and suggestible? The rituals were real, but the chemical enhancements, that's the mystery. There's evidence of dream oils made with opium poppy, blue lotus, mandrake, and cannabis, blended into massage oils and pillow sachets. One recipe includes fig sap and honey stirred into barley beer and consumed before prayer on the 7th hour of the night. It doesn't scream trip, but it doesn't scream normal sleep hygiene either. Some scrolls suggest these dreams were taken very seriously. People wrote them down, painted them, even altered their life paths based on what they saw. One man claimed a dream told him to become a scribe. Another was instructed to move cities. One woman left her husband. And if the dream didn't come, you weren't ignored. You were given stronger oil. You find a small alcove labelled Voice of the Moon. Inside, a bowl of resin, a painted statue of Isis, and 3 mats. Only 3. You lie down again, because you're hooked now. This time, the oil burns cold. You feel the dreams before they come. Visuals cascade behind your eyelids like someone else's memory. You hear your name, but in a different voice. You open a door that isn't real. You fly, but your wings are scrolls. You wake gasping. The priest is already there. "Did you see water?" he asks. You nod. Then the path is clear. 7s. Was this therapy? Religion? Covert pharmacology? A combination? Some researchers believe these were ancient versions of guided psychedelic journeys, using low-dose herbs and high-dose ritual to unlock deep psychological insights. Others say it's sleep plus drama. The science is fuzzy, but the outcomes, very real. People came out of these temples changed, lighter, less sick, more certain. Whether it was the oils, the chants, the dreams, or the belief itself, something worked. And one more thing. Some temples kept dream libraries, scrolls of recorded visions, carefully catalogued, analysed for symbols, tones, visitations. There are mentions of patterns, shared dreams across different people, gods appearing to strangers on the same night, prophecies repeating in fragments, sounds suspiciously like collective hallucination, or maybe the oldest shared story threads known to man. You leave the temple just as the sun breaks over the horizon. The linen headband is damp with sweat. The oil has dried into your skin. You feel like you've been somewhere else. Not far, but not here. And you realise the Egyptians didn't treat dreams as escapes. They treated them as messages, and they made sure they could hear them clearly, even if it took a little potion to tune in. You wake in a cramped, candlelit space that smells like salt, dust, and old wood. Someone hisses for silence. The air crackles with tension. Footsteps echo in a corridor nearby, measured, armoured, deliberate. You're inside a tomb. But this time, you're not supposed to be here. You've stumbled into the shadowy world of tomb robbers, and what they're after isn't just gold. It's resin, salves, strange powders, and maybe something far more addictive. Let's set the scene. Egypt's tombs weren't just graveyards. They were treasure chests packed with high-grade, ritual-grade, god-grade materials. Jars filled with rare ointments, unguents, and embalming mixtures so chemically complex. Modern labs still can't replicate them exactly. And for some, that's more valuable than gold. A man kneels next to a canopic jar, gently prying it open. He isn't stealing jewellery. He's after the sticky, amber-coloured sludge inside. "If it burns sweet," he whispers, "it's real." He smears some on a rag and lights it. The smell is warm, rich, almost floral. He inhales deeply, eyes fluttering. That's mumia, a blackish-brown paste derived from embalmed bodies and burial resins. By the late periods of Egyptian history, people believed it had healing properties. Some even ground it up and ate it. Others burned it like incense to get high. Gross? Definitely. But also historically accurate. Fringe? Not really. There are well-documented cases of tomb robbers in both ancient and more modern times seeking out resin-infused linen wrappings, scraping them off to extract the aromatic chemicals, many of which contained frankincense, myrrh, benzoin, and possibly cannabis resin. One scroll, written by a priest-turned-informer, describes a gang that smuggled chunks of embalming resin into markets disguised as perfume. "It dulls the pain and sharpens the dreams," he wrote. You don't know if that's poetic or literal, but watching the man beside you sniff linen and smile like he's remembering his own funeral, it starts to make sense. Let's talk chemistry. Many embalming mixtures used pine resin, bitumen, cinnamon oil, cedar extract, and sometimes poppy latex, aka opium. In sealed tombs, these substances could remain potent for years, even centuries. Some would ferment. Some would crystallize. Some would age into strange new compounds with unknown effects. Historians still argue whether mummia was truly psychoactive or just placebo wrapped in taboo. But whether it was real or imagined, the fact remains. People stole it, bought it, inhaled it, worshipped it, and sometimes, yes, got hooked. You find another robber opening a small jar sealed with wax. The moment it cracks, the room fills with a scent like bruised fruit and camphor. Funeral balm, he mutters, dipping his finger in. Still warm, even now. Sevens, he offers you a taste. You decline. Probably wise, but not everyone was cautious. There are rumours, whispers of resin junkies among the lower temple castes, people who couldn't go a day without inhaling the balm fumes or chewing linen soaked in ceremonial oils. Some texts suggest temple guards were rotated frequently, not to prevent theft, but to prevent exposure dependency. One recovered papyrus from a hidden library contains warnings. The balm of the deep sleeps in the bone. Do not take it when Ra is gone, lest your soul not return. Sounds dramatic. Might also be solid advice. You sneak into a small chamber, just off the burial vault. The walls are lined with broken pottery. Not from looting, but from ritual use. Burn marks inside the jars tell you something was cooked here. Maybe the original embalmers. Maybe someone else later. Either way, the residue still smells like lotus, ash, and something spicy. You feel a little lightheaded just standing there. A fringe theory proposes that tombs, particularly royal ones, were psychoactive environments. Sealed chambers where resins cured in still air, soaking the room in volatile compounds. Anyone who entered, robber or reverent, would inhale a ghost cocktail. Part memory, part madness. All unintended. One scroll even describes a curse that causes visions of the dead for those who disturb sacred oils. Historians laugh. Neuroscientists don't. There's evidence that prolonged inhalation of certain terpenes can cause hallucinations, especially in low oxygen, in closed spaces. You sit beside a wall painting, faded, but still legible. A boat sailing across a sky of stars. A man with the head of a hawk offering something from a jar to a kneeling soul. It looks ceremonial, but the glyph below, it translates to, what is bitter when it opens the path? Sevens. Whatever that meant, the tomb robbers took it seriously. Some even respected the substances. A few carried personal ritual items, amulets to appease the spirit of what they were stealing. Not out of morality, but because, well, they'd seen things. One robber tells you he saw the eyes on a sarcophagus move after he inhaled the wrong oil. Another claims he lost 2 days in a royal tomb and came back speaking in reversed script. Fringe tales? Sure. But too many people tell them for it to be just flair. You watch as they finish their haul. No gold. No jewels. Just jars of paste, cloth-wrapped sachets, powdered resin in pouches. They vanish into the night, high on gods and history. And you're left with the realization that even in death, the Egyptians' connection to chemistry and consciousness didn't fade. It lingered, waiting to be reawakened. And maybe that was the most dangerous treasure of all. The festival starts with a scream. Not the panicked kind. This is ritualized, rhythmic, primal. A woman in leopard skin throws her head back, arms raised, as a chorus echoes her cry. You're swept up in a tide of incense, drums, and bodies moving like flames in wind. You've arrived at one of Egypt's great public festivals, a state-sanctioned celebration that makes Mardi Gras look like a PTA meeting. Specifically, this one honours Hathor, goddess of music, fertility, intoxication, and sacred chaos. And let's just say, things escalate quickly. You're handed a drink. Warm, sweet, laced with something you can't name. Maybe Blue Lotus wine, maybe poppy syrup. You sip, because refusing would be rude. Within minutes, your vision tilts ever so slightly, colours richer, sounds deeper. You're in it now. Festivals like these weren't just parties. They were safety valves, massive public rituals designed to blow off spiritual steam, reset the cosmic order, and remind everyone that the gods wanted joy. Wild, messy, intoxicating joy. And yes, they often involved chemical enhancement. Let's break it down. First, there's the music. Drums, sistrums, harps, pipes, layered into a kind of sonic hypnosis. No melody, just rhythm, repetition. You feel it in your ribcage. Your thoughts start marching to the beat. Then the incense. Smoke curls from braziers burning kai-fi, cannabis resin, frankincense, and something that smells like roasted orange peel. It clings to your skin, fills your lungs. You're breathing history and maybe low-dose euphoria. You follow the crowd as it surges toward the river. Women chant verses while pouring wine into the Nile. To honour her hunger, they say. Others dance in the shallows, laughing, arms slick with oil. This is worship, yes, but also release. The Festival of Drunkenness, yes, that's a real name, was held to honour the myth where Hathor nearly destroyed humanity, but was pacified with beer dyed red to look like blood. The people drank with her to keep her calm, or to share in her chaos. Depends on who's telling the story. And this wasn't just for the elite. Farmers, merchants, bakers. Everyone participated. Some scholars think the state encouraged it. A controlled burst of madness to keep society stable. Like a purge, but with more dancing. You see someone smear their chest with a thick, dark balm. It smells herbal, floral, and just a little bitter. They sway to the music, eyes half-lidded. Another woman offers you a garland of poppy pods and lotus blossoms. To stay open, she says. You wear it. There's a whispered ritual happening under a fig tree. 3 women pass a small bowl filled with a viscous wine, steeped in mandrake, cinnamon, and date syrup. They take sips and press their foreheads together. It's intimate, sacred, slightly unhinged. One priest stumbles through the crowd with a sistrum in one hand and a carved lion mask in the other. He's invoking Sekhmet, the war goddess. He dances on broken pottery without flinching. His feet bleed. He laughs. Fringe theorists love this stuff. They argue these festivals were entheogenic ceremonies disguised as parties. Mass rituals where altered states led to group visions, shared catharsis, maybe even collective healing. Mainstream historians call that a stretch. But the line between theatre and trip is blurry out here. And it wasn't just Hathor. The Festival of Bastet. Total chaos. Wine, music, wild boats, suggestive songs, and what one scribe described as nights without memory. Celebrants sailed from Memphis to Bubastis, drinking the entire way, playing loud music, and worshipping the goddess with abandon. That's a quote. One record describes a procession where worshippers carried jars of cannabis oil, pouring it over statues, then anointing themselves. Not symbolic. Soaked in it. Shiny, high, reverent. Another festival honoured Min, the fertility god. Celebrants paraded with vegetables. Phallic ones. Enough said. Back to tonight. A man plays a double reed pipe while people around him fall into what looks like slow motion. You sit beside an old woman crushing petals into oil. She tells you the gods walk faster when the people lose their rhythm. The noise, she says, keeps them near. She gives you a bite of joy bread, dense, sweet, laced with blue lotus, henna root, and honey. Your mouth tingles, your stomach warms, and then everything glows. Not blinding, just bright enough to see the threads between things. You start to see why the Egyptians made room for this. They didn't separate sacred from sensual. The body was the temple. Laughter was an offering. Dance was a spell. And intoxication, that was a shortcut to the divine. Because let's face it, sometimes the gods only whisper when you've stopped making sense. As the night stretches on, the music thickens. People weep. People laugh. Two strangers hold hands and chant the name of a star. One woman falls to her knees and sings a note so pure it hushes the crowd for a breathless moment. And in that silence, you feel it. Not just connection, but permission to unravel, to overflow, to let the chemicals and chants and chaos lift you. Because in this ancient world, the divine wasn't a statue behind ropes. It was right here, dancing beside you. The music from the festival still rings in your ears as you walk away, barefoot and dazed, through sand now cool beneath your feet. You turn a corner and nearly trip over a cat. Not just any cat. This one wears a tiny gold collar, eyes like polished obsidian. It blinks slowly, knowingly. You're not hallucinating. Probably. Because here in ancient Egypt, cats weren't pets. They were divine conduits. And in some rituals, maybe more than you'd guess, animal worship blurred with drug use, creating a world where worshipping a sacred animal could be chemically enhanced. You follow the cat, because of course you do. It leads you into a courtyard where women kneel before a shrine to Bastet, the feline goddess of protection, pleasure, and, let's be honest, general mystery. Incense wafts from bowls. The smell is unmistakable. Myrrh, lotus, and something peppery, maybe cannabis. The girl anoints her forehead with oil, bows to the cat, then closes her eyes. Her lips move in prayer. A second later, she's swaying slightly, murmuring, clearly somewhere else. That oil? Likely infused with psychoactives. There are recipes that call for soaking blue lotus in warm olive oil for days, then adding frankincense resin and poppy extract. Used not to knock someone out, but to open them up. Spiritually, emotionally, chemically. You wander through the Bastet temple, and it's not just cats. Mummified ibises, falcons, crocodiles, and even baboons line the halls. Each species tied to a god, each god linked to rituals. Some of those rituals, deeply altered. Take Thoth, god of wisdom, who often appeared as an ibis, or sometimes a baboon. There's a record of priests smearing a paste made from fermented dates and mandrake root across their foreheads, while praying to Thoth under the full moon. Not casually, ritualistically. The goal? To hear his words before waking. Sevens. Some believe that baboons kept in temples were chosen for their strange behaviours, the ones who danced, shrieked, or stared at things nobody else could see. Were they epileptic? Just wild? Or did someone spike their food? Historians still argue whether animal worship involves psychoactives directly. There's no definitive scroll that says, "We gave poppy wine to the temple cat." But there are clues. Murals showing worshippers fainting in front of animal statues. Descriptions of seeing the light through Sekhmet's eyes. Accounts of visions triggered by the roar of the crocodile. Sevens. That last one. Intriguing. In temples to Sobek, the crocodile god, visitors sometimes fasted and inhaled resin-heavy smoke before entering sacred pools. Once inside, they would wait, praying for a vision or a dream. If a crocodile swam near them, it was considered an omen. If it brushed against them, that was divine contact. But think about it, floating in a dark pool, sleep-deprived, high on lotus resin and myrrh smoke, as a 6-foot reptile brushes your leg. Yeah, you'd see something. You find a painted chamber showing a festival for Anubis, jackal-headed god of the dead. Worshippers are shown drinking from tall vessels, eyes closed, surrounded by stylized smoke. One scroll calls it wine of forgetting, consumed before carrying offerings to the embalming shrines. Scholars still debate if the forgetting was symbolic, or if something more numbing was stirred into the mix. And what about the animals themselves? Some theorists suggest temple animals were sometimes passively dosed, not out of cruelty, but as part of ritual design. Imagine a baboon swaying, seemingly in trance, a falcon blinking slowly while standing still for hours, a crocodile floating unnaturally calm, all of it reinforcing the idea that these beings were already divine, closer to gods, higher in every sense. Fringe theories go further. One proposes that priests believed certain animals could carry psychoactive energy, that by praying in their presence, or touching them, or mimicking their sounds under the influence of vision-inducing herbs, one could merge spirit signatures. It sounds far-fetched until you see a woman in trance, crawling on all fours, mewling softly beside the bastet altar, her eyes wide and unseeing. Was she pretending? Or perceiving? The temple offers a small elixir, a thick liquid of pomegranate, lotus, and something bitter. It's taken to speak as the lion speaks. You sip. The bitterness fades quickly. Your breath slows. The golden statues around the altar seem to shimmer, just for a moment. You lie beneath a painted ceiling of stars. A priest places a cold object on your chest, a carved cat amulet. For dreams, he says. He dabs oil behind your ears. The scent floods your sinuses. Later, you wake with the image of a black feline standing on a red sun, its tail wrapped around the moon. You try to describe it. The priest only nods. You've met her, he says. No further questions. Here's the core truth. The Egyptians didn't separate animal worship, god invocation, and altered states. They layered them, blended them, let one feed the other. Was it all belief? Or biochemistry? Probably both. You watch a temple boy feed a cat from a gold dish. The cat purrs, rubs against a resin-stained pillar, then stares into nothing with eerie precision. You look into its eyes, and wonder if maybe, just maybe, Sevens, it's looking back through you. You're back on dry desert ground, sun high overhead, when a man in a dusty white robe beckons you with a crooked finger and says, "Want to see where they talk to the sky people?" Sevens, you laugh. You think he's joking. He's not. Because welcome to the wildest theories in the ancient Egyptian playbook, the alien connections, the DMT stargates, the pharaohs as extraterrestrial hybrid school of thought. And while most scholars roll their eyes so hard they nearly sprain something, there's a reason these fringe ideas won't die. They're just barely crazy enough to be interesting. You follow the man into a stone chamber carved deep into the rock. The walls are covered in stars, but not random, patterned, precise. The ceiling is painted with a figure bent over the sky. Nut, the goddess of the heavens. Her body dotted with constellations that modern astronomers have matched to real star clusters. Cool, right. Now here's where it goes off the rails. He points to a mural of a man kneeling beneath a beam of light. His eyes are wide. His hands are raised. They called it Ra, the man whispers. But look, doesn't that look like a craft? Sevens. And you have to admit, it kind of does. Fringe theorists argue that certain rituals, especially those involving psychoactive substances, weren't just for divine communion. They were extraterrestrial encounters. That the smoke-filled temples, rhythmic chanting, and mind-altering herbs were a kind of neural launchpad. A way to send the soul, or the mind, into the cosmos. Too far? Maybe. But let's talk DMT again. Remember acacia? Grows all over Egypt. Contains compounds related to dimethyltryptamine. You find another scroll describing a night flower elixir, consumed under moonlight, and followed by seeing the flame limbs of the sky gods. Not metaphor. Description. One legend tells of Thoth travelling through the spine of the night to speak with stars that move like fireflies. A poetic vision, or a chemically induced breakthrough trip. Historians still argue. The priests of Heliopolis, in particular, had a fascination with the heavens. They built obelisks aligned with star risings, tracked Venus, Sirius, and Orion. Even some temple layouts matched celestial patterns. Coincidence? Cosmic reverence? Or something more intentional? The theory goes like this. Psychoactives weren't just for contact with gods, they were for contact with elsewhere. Other dimensions. Other beings. The Netja, sometimes translated as gods, could also mean forces. Or, according to the fringe, visitors. You're taken to the Osirian at Abydos, a strange, subterranean temple built from blocks heavier than anything else from the same era. Some stones show no tool marks, some doorways go nowhere. You're told this place was built by those who remembered before. The man won't elaborate. He hands you a cup of cold, spiced drink. Tastes like wine, but sharper. Your ears buzz slightly. Inside the Osirian, it's dark, wet, echoing. You feel weightless. The pillars seem taller than they should be. You close your eyes and, yep, you see lights behind your eyelids. Not shapes, not images, just light, pulsing, matching your breath. The man whispers. They open the gate with the flower and the name. Sevens. You don't know what that means, but it feels true. And that's the danger of fringe theory. It gets inside your head like a tune with no lyrics. Maybe you're high. Maybe it's the power of suggestion. Maybe that drink had something in it. Probably all three. Back outside, he shows you an amulet. It's the Eye of Ra, but the shape is unmistakably close to the human pineal gland, what some call the third eye. Theorists love this one. They say the Egyptians knew how to stimulate the pineal gland with blue lotus, with vibration, with light and dark cycles. That they activated it like a spiritual antenna. Mainstream historians? Not impressed. Correlation isn't causation, they say. Symbolism doesn't equal science. And they're probably right. Probably. But you're still wondering about that phrase. The gods who came in light, found in temple inscriptions across different dynasties, sometimes accompanied by images of boats in the sky, sometimes with stylized beings offering knowledge, or in one bizarre case, helmets. And then there's the Dendera light, a carving found in the temple of Hathor that looks, depending on your level of skepticism, either like a lotus bulb with a snake inside, or a giant light bulb connected to a power cable. Seriously, Google it. Go down the rabbit hole. You'll either laugh or lose sleep. You sit down with a carved stone tablet showing the weighing of the heart. Except the beam above the scales is shaped like an arch. The fringe crowd calls it a portal. Others say it's just decorative balance. But you're already seeing things. Or maybe just re-seeing them. Because whether the ancient Egyptians saw literal aliens, or just their gods wrapped in cosmic language, what's clear is that they had a system. They built technologies of the mind using herbs, oils, sound, and architecture. And whether they were talking to the gods, the stars, or just their own subconscious. They got somewhere, and maybe the real mystery isn't what they saw, but how they knew how to see it. You're in a sleek, modern lab now. The white walls are spotless, the lighting way too bright, and the table in front of you holds something wild, a recreated perfume from Cleopatra's lost formula, pulled from residue found in a shattered amphora near Alexandria. One drop on your wrist and you're catapulted backward in time. Almost. This isn't ancient Egypt. It's now, and you're standing among scientists, archaeologists, And, yes, chemists trying to rebuild the ancient highs, the sacred recipes, the mind-altering magic. Welcome to the science of ancient intoxication. On one side of the lab, a pharmacologist is reverse engineering Ki-Fi incense. His version includes raisins, myrrh, frankincense, juniper, cinnamon, and, most controversially, cannabis resin. When they burned a tiny amount in a fume hood, 2 interns fell asleep and one claimed he heard a bell underwater. Controlled? Not exactly. Reproducible. Debatable. But it's happening. And the deeper researchers dig, the more they realise the Egyptians weren't winging it. They were experimenting, recording, tweaking. Their recipes weren't random. They were calibrated. You watch a mycologist analyse mould samples taken from ancient beer pots. Turns out, several contain traces of Claviceps purpurea, better known as ergot, the same fungus used to synthesize LSD. Coincidence? Maybe. But the dose makes the poison, and the vision. A team in Cairo is testing chemical residues from 3 1,000-year-old perfume jars found in Theban tombs. One shows markers of blue lotus, cardamom, and linalool, a compound found in lavender that can calm the nervous system. Add in a little opium from neighbouring jars, and you've got a body balm that could calm grief or transport consciousness. You interview a biochemist holding up a sample of dried acacia bark. Most people see a tree, she says. We see DMT precursors. She walks you through a theory that priests could have learned how to extract psychoactive effects by boiling bark in wine. She hasn't confirmed it yet, but she's tried it, and she doesn't sleep much anymore. Meanwhile, a neuroscientist in Berlin runs EEG scans on volunteers inhaling replicas of Egyptian incense. The results? Slowed alpha waves, deep theta spikes, brain states consistent with a light trance or meditative dissociation. In one trial, a participant burst into tears, claiming she saw a voice-like light. What does that mean? No one knows, but they recorded it. Then there are the aromatherapists, yep, actual scent scientists, trying to recreate the perfumes used in oracles and seduction rituals. They've uncovered that certain resin blends, like those used in Hathor's temples, can produce respiratory euphoria, a subtle but real bodily sensation that amplifies emotion. It's not a hallucination, but it feels like one. Historians used to laugh off these effects. Now they're wondering if the Egyptians were operating on a kind of intuitive pharmacology, identifying stackable compounds that, together, shifted perception without wrecking the body. You attend a conference where someone presents their theory. That Egyptian incense use was the world's oldest form of psychonautics, mind travel by smoke. There are slides, charts, a video of someone getting visibly overwhelmed after 15 minutes in a sealed room filled with lab-pure Ki-Fi. There's still disagreement, of course. Some Egyptologists hate this stuff. They call it drug evangelism and argue that most of the psychoactive links are overstated. They point out that no scroll ever says, "Smoke this and you'll see Osiris." That most references to seeing the divine could mean dreams, or symbolic connection, or straight-up performance. But even they can't ignore the residue. Because here's the game changer. Chemical analysis of tomb jars, temple burners, and mummy wrappings has confirmed the presence of dozens of psychoactive or psychosensory compounds, including opium alkaloids, cannabinoids, and terpenes, known to affect mood and cognition. In other words, it wasn't just metaphor. Back in the lab, a grad student pulls out a test tube of fermented beer, brewed using ancient yeast strains harvested from a pottery shard found near Giza. It smells awful. You sip it anyway. It's sour, weirdly floral, slightly numbing on the tongue. You feel it almost immediately. Not drunk, not tripping, just like your mind is wearing velvet. Later, they run tests on your vitals. Heart rate, steady. Cortisol, down. Dopamine markers, up. You ask if they'd call it intoxication. Sevens, they say. We call it access. Sevens, you're shown a prototype. A VR headset loaded with 3D reconstructions of temple chambers, synced to soundscapes based on sistrum rhythms and incense compositions. It's an immersive trip built on archaeology. You sit through a 5-minute simulation and leave sweating, euphoric and confused. And this is just the beginning. Because the more science tries to dissect ancient Egypt's psychoactive heritage, the more it realizes the ancients weren't just guessing. They were crafting experiences, environments, full-body, multi-sensory rituals that blurred the lines between medicine, worship, art, and alteration. They didn't have microscopes or neurotransmitter models, but they had centuries of pattern recognition. They knew what made people feel fear, feel peace, feel connected. They designed around it, built with it, burned it, drank it, painted it on walls and wrapped it in linen. And now, we're just trying to catch up. You descend a narrow stairway, stone-worn smooth by generations of reverent feet, into the bowels of a tomb no tourist has ever seen. It's not lit by torches or neon safety strips. Just the soft flicker of an oil lamp clutched in your hand. The flame gutters with every breath, sending shadows dancing across the carved walls. The air is dense, heavy with the perfume of ages. Not rot, not mildew. Something older, richer. Frankincense, myrrh, and a sweet, sharp note that might be cedar or lotus or resin released from mummified linen. It smells like prayer and memory and sleep. You're not here to loot. You're not even here to learn anymore. You're here to feel. This chamber is layered with scent. There are jars in the corners, sealed with wax, their contents long dried or crystallized. Some smell of dried dates, others of sharp acacia. One emits a puff of air when you nudge it open, and suddenly you're transported. A hit of aged lotus oil rushes your nose and curls your toes. You weren't ready. The walls show painted processions, gods receiving offerings, priests with arms outstretched, incense trailing from censers. One figure lies on a bed shaped like a lion. Above him, a bird with a human head hovers. The bay, the soul. And in front of it, a bowl of smoke rising into stars. You sit cross-legged beside it, just watching. Because the Egyptians believed you didn't go into the afterlife cold. You went in surrounded by sound, scent, memory. You went in saturated, anointed, lit from within by oils and incantations, by things that helped you remember who you were, even as you became something else. You find a bundle wrapped in linen. Inside, a faded sachet of herbs, lotus, cinnamon, poppy, and something that smells like crushed pine cones. You press it to your face. It smells like weightlessness, like water in the desert, like being halfway between this world and wherever the bay goes next. One fringe theory calls it olfactory immortality, the idea that the smell of certain resins or flowers could literally guide the soul, that the gods responded not to prayers, but to fragrance frequencies. Sounds ridiculous until you breathe this air and feel your body shift. You spot a carved scarab on the ground, half buried in sand. It's coated with dried oil, black and hard as glass. You wonder who anointed it, what dreams they had, whether they came true. There's no music in this chamber, but somehow you hear something. Not quite a hum, more like a rhythm your body remembers. Like the sistrum, like breath. Like the beating of your own heart amplified through time. Was the scent enough to open the gates? Or was it a key placed in your pocket long before you arrived? You lie back against the cool stone, letting the air do its work. Every inhale a soft reminder. This was not a culture afraid of death. This was a culture that designed for it, planned its perfumes, honoured its architecture, made sure that the very smell of the afterlife would welcome you. They didn't just want to preserve bodies. They wanted to preserve states of being, And maybe that's the truest high of all, not the intoxication that unravels, but the one that remembers. So you breathe, slowly, deeply, until the lamp flickers one last time, sevens, and goes out. You're still, fully still. The air around you is quiet now. Not silent, just softened. No incense, no chanting, no priests or potions. Just the faint echo of all you've seen, all you've smelled, all you've remembered. Your breath has slowed. So has your heart. Everything feels distant, but in a good way. Like you've pulled ashore after floating across a sea you forgot existed. And maybe that's what the Egyptians knew best. That the world is noisy, that the body is demanding, but that inside all of us is a quiet place, waiting. Not empty, rich, threaded with memory, rhythm, scent, and spirit. We don't always find it during the day, but at night, sometimes, tonight, you've wandered through temples and tombs, festivals and healing halls. You've smelled the sacred, tasted the forgotten, touched the fabric of altered perception, not just for fun, but to understand what those ancient people might have been chasing. Sevens, connection, peace, presence, maybe even eternity. So as you lie here now, in your real bed, far from the Nile, let your breath settle. Let your limbs grow heavy. You don't need incense or oil. Just stillness. Just sleep. The kind that doesn't erase the journey, but carries it deeper. The kind the ancients might have called divine. Good night, explorer. And may your dreams be laced with lotus. End of script. Sweet dreams.